I am really excited and beyond grateful, really, for this person to be my very first interview as a sibling. And I'm excited because when I met her, it was 25 years. I calculated this, by the way, 25 years after my sister began her bulimia. 25 years before I met my first sibling. And it, for me, was the beginning of some real healing. It was really the beginning of feeling heard and feeling like I wasn't alone, even though my sister had already passed away at that time. So I feel like this is a gift, and I'm extremely honored to introduce my friend and someone who's been a big part of my healing and my family's healing, Leah Siskin, who has really, I'm excited to hear your story, excited to hear your perspective, and I am thankful that you have joined me today. So welcome.
Thank you. So that was such a nice intro.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's true.
I feel the same way about you.
Work hard at that at all. So I thought we'd start just by jumping in, and in the intro, I give a little bit about your background, but we'd love to hear your story from you.
I appreciate the chance to get to share my story, which is really my sister's story, which became my family's story. My sister struggled with bulimia for almost 7 years, and ultimately she lost that battle when she was 19 and I was 21. And you do the quick math, her behaviors started when she was about 12, going into middle school, those wonderful, rough middle school years where she really decided she wanted to be popular and she was going to, do what in her mind would help her become popular. And part of that was these eating disorder behaviors. And in fact, one afternoon, her and a group of friends decided to see if they could make themselves throw up, and two of the girls in the group, including my sister, ended up developing an eating disorder, and the rest didn't. And that's just to say that, I know how challenging and complicated no one experience is going to mean someone's going to develop an eating disorder. But my sister was a lot more than her eating disorder. She was funny and creative and really smart and passionate about everything she did, whether it was volunteering or she wanted to be a nurse, and so she worked at the hospital. She was a good student. She was an athlete, which was a complicated part of her eating disorder. So she was a dancer and a swimmer, and was on our pom squad in the high school. And there was this other part of it where she had this eating disorder, and she wanted to be the best that she could, by the way she defined it. And in talking to her later on in her experience, it wasn't necessarily every day, but these were all behaviors that started with over exercising and trying to watch her weight. But if you're a competitive athlete, you can't compete at a high level if you're not eating, right? So that kind of took anorexia or any kind of like restrictive eating controls off the table, because the ultimate goal was to be perfect at what she was doing, whatever that was. And her sports were no different than her school or anything else. I'm 2 years older than my sister, so walking through this with her, next to her, behind her, was definitely a tough experience. And especially because I think she had a lot of physical pains that she never realized had anything to do with what she was doing, her behaviors. So her moods were hard to predict. One minute she was, my fun younger sister that I could hang out with, and other times, she wouldn't speak to me, or she would say really awful things to me, which made me not want to be around her. And that's also challenging. And, I think after she passed away, it was a really challenging time for me, because it was 2003 and there was no outlet for me, or for losing my sister, and I wanted to do something good to remember her by. And my parents and I set up a scholarship at our high school, but it wasn't until 2011 that I got involved with the National Eating Disorders Association, which was the first time I actually felt like I could really contribute to this really important issue and cause. And even if it was just walking in a walk or attending a conference, to better understand what's going on, what the research shows. Because I had read the teen books when I was a teenager, that one of the characters has an eating disorder and they could die, or they do die in the book. But I knew I hoped by 2011 that there was more to it than that. So that's a little bit about my story.
You and I have talked extensively about this, but for people who have never really even had the chance to hear a sibling story, why do you think it's important for parents too? I know parents often ask us both that question, and there are siblings that have never spoken to another sibling before. Why do you think it's important that we have this conversation at all?
It's a great question. I think I remember when we met, and I can actually remember it was at the National Eating Disorders Conference. And I think the first big conversation we had was during some event they were having on the outside terrace. And you and I are sitting off to the side, and people are schmoozing and trying to introduce themselves. And of course, we're both being very polite. And I remember thinking wow, I've never talked to another sibling. And at that point, I had done a grief and loss support group, and I had talked to other people who had lost someone before. But A, to talk to a sibling, and B, to talk to a sibling who lost their sister also from eating disorder was beneficial for a lot of reasons. And I think the sibling story is important because the eating disorder isn't occurring in isolation. And of course, in terms of the medical needs and the stress of dealing with someone with an eating disorder and trying to get them the help they need, and depending on how long it's been going on, there's a lot of factors. But you have these siblings in the family. And I remember in a sociology class in college, learning that for every person who's in a family, that's how many families you have. And that's always stuck with me, because I think about my family, and I think about my experience and my parents' experiences and my sister's experience. And it was four families existing all within the same
So good.
place.
That's so true. Wow. That's really interesting. I never heard
that. Yeah, it's always resonated for me. And I think the sibling story, it can be really, really isolating, because, I have extremely wonderful friends, and two best friends that I've grown up with, who have seen a lot of facets of my life, including those facets. But even with the two of them as my strongest supports, they're still not there every day. They still don't hear it when my sister was, in the bathroom and I could hear her, through the wall. and me getting to a point where I was so mad that I'm like banging on the wall because I decided, fine, like if you're going to do this and you're going to do it and I can hear you, then I'm going to bang on the wall. And later on, just wishing that we had, like, I knew, like, that I had some resources. And I mean, Kim, you and I have talked about in both cases with both of our sisters, you know, this was before Google or Facebook or NIDA even existed. And so, like, my parents read books and found, you know, looked at all the stuff that was available then. But for me being a teenager, there wasn't a lot of, you know, there wasn't, besides fiction, young adult fiction, where someone, you know, a character had an eating disorder, there wasn't anything. And like, so that conversation and validation that you're not the only person, not the only sibling going through this, that there's somebody who understands even when your backgrounds are different or your age is different, or, and I've come into contact with siblings now and have conversations where, you know, it's just having someone sit across from you and be like, yes, I get it too, is
They just know.
Yeah.
They just know.
It makes you feel heard and understood.
Banging on the wall.
Yeah.
So relate to that. Just enraged. Just stop. I can't take this anymore. Right. And it's not meant to be mean. It isn't. People have asked me in the past, don't you think it'll create a them against us if you start talking about how you really feel? And I laugh, and no, it's what's happening. It's the reality of the situation, and we have to talk about it. It's not we shouldn't have to be quiet to pretend. That's dysfunction, right? You have to talk about what's really going on. And it is wonderful to hear that, to hear someone else reflect a similar situation back, like you just saying it. I was like, oh gosh, totally remember those days, you know, just that storyline or the pains, and you're just left sitting there going, what am I supposed to do with this? My sister's in the other room hurting herself. I mean, it's violent and it's terrifying, especially in bulimia. You know, it's so violent, and there's nothing. What do you do? How are you supposed to react to that when you're 14 years old or 17? You know, you're so young. We think we know what's going on at that time, but you're really young, and that's a big responsibility for someone's health in that regard, and it's scary. So it is nice to be able to. I remember just hearing you say things, and I'm like, oh my gosh, someone else knows.
Yeah.
Someone knows.
Yeah. And I think, you know, something you just said reminded me, like, about when you were talking about we need to talk about it, and like, are you risking alienating the person? And I think because we didn't have a way to talk about it, because at that point, and I know some of this has changed over the years, although, you know, I've also heard mixed things now, but, you know, families weren't included in treatment when my sister went to get help when she was a freshman in college. You know, she got to the point where she went into inpatient. But even then, you know, they basically told my parents, like, relapses happen. It's just part of the process. And that was it, like, goodbye.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so to feel, and that was already so long into her illness that I don't think we knew how to, I didn't feel equipped for sure on how to talk to her. And it was sort of just always gauging her moods. But I do distinctly remember when I was a junior in college, and this was right before she went into inpatient, my parents had told me that, you know, she was going to be going to inpatient. And at that point, our relationship had actually gotten a little better. And we were talking semi-regularly on the phone. And so she happened to call me after my mom had told me this. And I was asking her how she was doing. And she said to me, oh, well, you know, my mom and dad think I'm going into inpatient, but I'm not going. And I was like, oh, okay. And I said, why? And she gave me a whole bunch of reasons of why outpatient was fine for her and she didn't need inpatient. And I had this light bulb moment where I was like, you know what? Like, screw it. I'm going to tell her how scared I really am. And she's going to listen. And I have no idea what's going to happen after I say these things. And so I told her, I said, you know, Sarah, like, I hear what you're saying and all the reasons you're giving me, but like, I have to tell you, like, I'm really scared. I'm really scared that something really bad is going to happen if you don't go to inpatient tomorrow. And that's all I said. And we talked a little bit longer. And by the end of the conversation, she said, okay, like, I'm going to do it and I'm going to go. And she really did. She went in for 3 weeks. And she came out and she had this plan and we were all really, really optimistic. And while ultimately, obviously everybody knows how it ends, like, that moment of making the choice is still like, I'm so happy I did it. And also, like, I so wish I had the tools or the ability or the understanding to say that a whole lot earlier, because I was scared way before my junior year of college.
Right. What would have helped you get to a place where you could approach her where it wasn't, I hate to say this, but personal, where you could just kind of be a little detached to say, I'm really concerned?
I think just
hard.
Even having that language. So it's funny, right? One of the things that for the last 6 years I've done is I am a facilitator for a healthy relationships and dating abuse prevention workshop. And one of the things we teach teenagers in that workshop is actually how to do I statements that feel like you, right? So the formula for an I statement is, you know, I feel, and then you just describe a feeling you have. So like, I feel scared when, and then you state either something you've seen or something you've heard. And no one can argue about something you've seen or heard. I mean, yes, my sister could have turned around and said, you don't understand what you've seen or heard, but theoretically, you should be able to state something you've seen or heard, and then you tie an action to it. I think we should go talk to someone. I just want you to know I'm here for you, whatever that action is. And for the years that I've been teaching it and talking about it, I always come back to the fact that, like, I wish I had had that. Like, I don't, and in these workshops I do, when we talk with teens about it, you know, it's not a magic bullet. There are going to be times where it works the way it worked that conversation I just gave as the example, where she heard me and she was ready to hear me. And there might have been times when she was younger where she wouldn't have, but I think I would have felt at least able to express it. Whereas I think for me, in thinking back, especially when it was like bad, and I was still like living at home, I was still in high school, but it wasn't like consistent. So it was sort of, some days were great and or weeks were fine, you know, especially like during her sports seasons. And I think during those times where like then the switch would flip, and I'd come home and she'd be like in the dark watching a movie, and you'd realize that she's like eaten half the things in the kitchen. You know, to be able to take those moments or the next morning and say something. Or even when she would, I think I can remember being on vacation, like vacations and holidays were really stressful, because I think she was probably so anxious about what was going on and the plan and how she would, you know, do what she needed to do. And I don't know that at that point my parents necessarily even had the tools to talk about that, but like vacations became like horrible because you would just wait for the blow up. But to be able to have some tools to express it to her, express it to my parents in a way that didn't feel like we were talking behind her back.
It's a really good point.
Because I think that's something like I can distinctly remember on a vacation where I don't even know what she did. I don't remember what like the fight was about, but like whatever she had done and sort of stormed off, like my parents and I were basically just hanging out. As crazy as that sounds for a teenager. And she came back and then was like more upset that we were like having fun without her, is how she saw it.
Mm-hmm.
And like, so then it felt like, well, we can't win because you got mad, you left.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're still here. So I think those are the kinds of things that I would have really appreciated having.
Just language to even express it. That was really difficult. I do remember that. Just what is happening and how do I even address this? But that's a really good tip. I really like that. I'll write that down in the message below. I'll write that little script down for people so they have it. I think it's sometimes when you're scared and it's really uncomfortable, to access that language is challenging. It's hard. And if you have like, okay, I know I can say this, it's helpful. Something I think, if there's a sibling watching who's never heard another sibling, what were some of the feelings, just the feelings that you had, and how did you feel about having those feelings? Was there a judgment there on them? Were you like, ooh, I probably shouldn't feel this? What was the experience? You were kind of alone in it, right? So what were you feeling and how did you feel about your experience? What was it like to be a sibling, basically?
Yeah. I mean, the first word that comes to mind is helplessness. I think it was both, and that helplessness then creates a lot of frustration in my experience, that, you know, I would see things, I would hear things, like, I'm not dumb, like, you know, and I think feeling the loss of trust, like never knowing if she was actually telling you the real truth.
Yeah.
And my sister also was a great actress. She loved acting anyways, just for fun, and, you know, did plays when we were young, and would create games. And so that like creative mind of hers, I think then when the illness came about, it was like, you didn't know which person you were getting. You didn't know how much things were true. And whether to believe her or whether to get in the fight because you think she's lying. And I can just remember like watching the experience, like watching her, and feeling like, you know, I don't know what to do. And I remember her calling me one time when I was home from college, because she was too exhausted to drive all the way home from work, but she had already made it like halfway to our house. She only worked 15 minutes from our house, and I had to go pick her up. And I would have these moments where I'm like, well, should I go pick her up? Like, is this the moment where she learns the lesson? And I think that's really hard also, because not that I think my parents necessarily had the answer either, but that feeling of like, well, I'm supposed to know whether that's the case. And I think it was just hard to be angry at her. I mean, I remember the last like year, our relationship had improved a lot, and I don't actually know when that changed or what it was that changed it. But I'm really glad that happened. And that's sort of for me where I think the sibling relationship is so important and can actually be a really good ally. Not to be like the tattletale or the spy. And I think that goes to your point around communication, which is like, I would have no problem at that stage, like when I said to her why I was scared, and when I said to her that I talked to mom, like it's not to be the spy for my parents, but rather for her to know, like, I'm here, like, you know, I'm a safe person. I care about her. And I think, like, I feel really lucky that we had like that year and a half. But that's a lot of emotions over the course of
It is. I
6 years.
know there's a continuum, right? We talked about this, and I think it's important for anybody watching that people have all different sorts of experiences. Some people never have a fight. They go through this and they work through it, and their family is all healthy and it's amazing, and they find recovery and it's fabulous, and they work through their stuff. And then it goes all the way to, I think, where my situation was it was hostile, and my sister had co-occurring issues and addictions where it was really intense and painful, and anger would be probably my primary state of living where I was just angry all the time because of the sadness and the fear and just the helplessness. I think that was I haven't heard someone say that before, just that helplessness of, especially when it's chronic and it's not year one, it's year 6.
Yeah.
And it's just not ending, and you don't know what else to try. It's really hard.
And I think it's hard to watch your parents because I mean, for me at least, up until that point, you know, if my parents said something was good, it was good. And if something was bad, it was bad. And I mean, of course, with the appropriate amount of teenager disbelief of their parents. But I mean, overall, and then to see how she could shake them and how it rattled like the foundation, I think was also just disconcerting. And I think it then became this piece where every time things were good, you're like, okay, they're good.
Yeah.
But like, for how long? Till when? And then when they were bad, it was, okay, this is also stressful. And yes, I want the bad to end, but at least I know that, like, right now we're in the bad. Whereas like when we're in the good, I'm just nervous about when the bad's going to come back.
Yeah. It's scary. That's a scary feeling. Yeah. And settling too. Oh gosh. Yeah, for sure. How were you ever enmeshed or codependent? Were you kind of the good child to make up for? Did you have any of those experiences, or were you pretty good with boundaries?
It's a really good question. That is so we're 2 years apart, right? So it's kind of interesting. I'm not sure. I would say that probably, you know, my take on it when it started to get bad while I was still at home, because for the last 3 years I wasn't at home. So this was only me coming home on break. So for the first 3 years, which for a good chunk of those, it was a much more like intermittent behavior for her. So like I said, like during her sports seasons were like a lot better because she was eating and she was, you know, so focused on what was going on with her, with that, that the episodes would be a lot more spaced out. Okay. But I would say when it was bad, and I remember coming home from winter break, like on winter breaks or spring breaks, like just sort of finding everything I could do that would keep me out of the house, and going to visit my friends and hanging out with my boyfriend at that time and his friends, and, you know, going pretty much wherever. So just not to be at home. And when I was in high school, I also had a part-time job, in addition to like my extracurriculars. Yeah. And not to say that I think I would have probably always had part-time jobs. I liked having my own spending money as a teenager. but I definitely think that piece of it, of just like always being busy, was really helpful in terms of like not always having to like be in it, because like at night I had to be in it because I had to go home and sleep.
Yeah.
So I think that, and I think my nature in general is sort of to try to make everybody like happy, like I'm the peacekeeper. So I think when I was home, that was sort of my stance.
Okay.
But I also remember there being times where I was just like, I don't think there's anything for me to say. And when I did say things, a lot of times it was more towards like, I think my parents, like trying to get them to calm down, because I just didn't know what to say to my sister.
Actually, I think that's really healthy. I admire that. You found a way to kind of find your life and your space, a place for you within a really challenging family dynamic, right? It's
Yeah.
pretty healthy. That's pretty good because I mean, you can't avoid it. You could,
Right.
I guess you could totally leave the family, but
Right.
that's pretty healthy. I'm impressed. That's good. That's good.
Thanks. It didn't feel that good at the time, I have to
No,
say.
I
I
know it doesn't feel
agree.
good, but
The
it was,
boundaries are very good, and
yeah, the boundaries were pretty set. I'm impressed with no family therapy or any like support that way. You found your way with boundaries. That's impressive because I was boundaryless. So I come from an extreme on the other side. So that's cool. I'm glad that you were able to find that a little bit of balance amongst, I mean, I know it wasn't easy, but
yeah.
you had places to breathe,
Yes.
get out of the
Yes.
house.
I feel very fortunate that I had as many supports, and I often would say, like when I talk to like, especially when I speak with middle schoolers or high schoolers, how my sister used to change friends the way a runner changes sneakers. So she always had like within her friend group, like the same-ish people, but she would kind of go through different people in terms of being like her best friend, or her closest friend. And and obviously I think that was part of managing her eating disorder, because it's a lot easier to keep a secret if somebody is not your best friend. And in fact, the only person that I think she stayed consistently close to also had an eating disorder. But I will often say when I'm talking that, that changing friends piece is a major red flag. But also for me, my friends and the stuff I was involved in high school, like a lot of it were things that I had been involved in for many years. And so I had people who were so familiar to me that I think that really did make a big difference. That even though, unlike you and I meeting where like we say a few lines, like sentences to each other about our experience and we're like, oh my God, you totally get it. Differently, I could go to any of these friends who I had literally known since, in one case, first grade, another fourth grade, and just like be around them and not have to like explain myself. And I think that as the sibling was like one of the biggest things. I think if I had been changing friend groups or friends the way she had, I it would not have been as successful. Like they ended up really being a support for me.
That's a great tip for friends who have friends who are struggling with a lot of different things. Just letting that person's story be like your friends did. You didn't have to explain it, is relieving. That is helping. You don't always have to fix it for them. I think people want to say the right thing, or there is no right thing to say, right? It just is hard. They're not going to fix it in 3 sentences. So just being able to be you and get a break and a breather and not have to explain yourself is nice. That's a good point. I never thought about that, but I had that too, where I could just go with my friends and they knew what was going on at home and I didn't have to rehash it again.
Right. And I think that's a really important piece, because I think friends feel an obligation that they need to give advice, or that they like that there's something they're supposed to do, and so if they don't know, then they're just gonna like stay away because they don't want to like say or do the wrong thing. And especially going through it as like the majority of it being when I was a teenager, my friends just, I mean, we also were just like hanging out and like having fun, or doing whatever silly thing we came up with on a Friday night. And I think that like sense of normalcy was also just really important to have. And I really appreciate that. And I appreciate that about my college friends. When my sister came to visit, which was also really stressful, I feel like very lucky both for friends, and I think it's good advice. I think it's good advice for the friends to like not be afraid of their friend, and also for parents too. That's a place that I think the normalcy really belongs. Like, I would have liked for my family to have figured out how to talk to each other. And I think that's different than maintaining normalcy of like friends or the things that I'm passionate about. And that was something I think my parents were very good at, in just sort of, all of my like extracurriculars never really changed while like this was going on with my sister.
That's
and
good.
so I think that was also helpful.
Yeah. And I think too, for parents to be able to, for parents who are in this right now, to be able to say, like the dad say to the son, okay, your brother has an eating disorder, and we always talk, it seems to always be about the eating disorder, right? So to go to the movies together and not bring it up, just have that time together where it's not about the eating disorder. It's about the movie you go see and the dinner you had and you had a good time. And there's that space that your family gets where it's not just constantly about the eating disorder. It seems to take over families, and it just drowns them. And they don't have the language, and all of a sudden it's just so, I don't know, tell me if it's we had different experiences. So tell me if this is how you felt, but it's weird to think that you couldn't come up with some solutions at the time that seem so obvious now. But when you're in the midst of that trauma, you're sort of just drowning it in the shame and in the fear and all those emotions, and everyone seems stunted somehow, and you can't get to the solution that might be right there.
Yeah. Well, and I think it becomes all encompassing. And I think it becomes about like being able to survive day to day. And I think where like
when the shoe gonna drop, that fear, like sitting in it, oh, I don't want to move because it might happen.
Right. And to spend the time on the language, like in our case where it wasn't easily accessible. And that's something I've been thinking about is like, yes, this language, whether it's the I statement, whether it's parents being encouraged to have a conversation with the sibling, or how you have family conversations. It's also about like, well, where do you find that? And when do you find that? Because it also, there's a certain amount of acceptance that you have to be able to go looking for it. It's not like there's some parenting class that you go to when your kids are 4 years old that's like, okay, body image and eating disorder behavior can start developing starting at age 8, so we're going to do some preventive health. That'd be really awesome, by the way, if that existed. But eating disorders, it doesn't have the same kind of preventive health measures that the physical illnesses of childhood that might have, or reading skills has. So that, I think that's also part of it too, is where do you find it, and like when you find it, to get that language.
Yes, that's really good. That's a really good point. What other, when you were going through this, was there one thing you really wanted, you wish that you had, that you could never find? Or was there something, when you were younger that you wish you could go back and tell yourself, for somebody that's going through it right now, that might just go, oh yeah, thank you for saying that? Or, anything that you may have felt was helpful? Could be very simple. It doesn't have to be anything complex or an answer.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I've found helpful is really talking with you, going to the NEDA conference, meeting other siblings. I mean, when they did, so there was the year we met, and then I think it was the next year they did a sibling roundtable. And I think that was so helpful and validating. And I think just being able to know that you're not the only sibling, because I think when you go searching for resources, obviously it's geared to how to help the person. But a lot of the language is geared either towards parents or educators and sometimes friends. But certainly at that time, I didn't even know where to look.
Yeah.
And I think because you learned about eating disorders for one session in a health class in high school, and it just felt like, where am I supposed to find this information?
Yeah.
I think those are the things that I wish. And I think if I could go back in time, I would give the I statement to myself. I think I would also say, this isn't her fault. It's not your parents' fault. It's not your fault. And this really sucks. And you love her and she's your sister, and it's worth speaking up and telling her that this really sucks. And to not be scared that she's going to run out the door, because the truth is she probably would have run out the door anyways.
Yeah.
But at least when she comes back, she knows we're here and we're staying here. And I think it took us a long, long time to be able to say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Families are navigating so on their own in many cases because they just don't have the resources to handle what's happening. They can't afford the treatments. They can't, whatever the reason. There's a lot of people. So those are really, those are basic things that make they seem simple, but they make a huge difference, I think. Gosh,
Yeah.
if someone had said just that to me, just that, and that was all I got, I would have felt armed so much more than I was. It's really good.
Well, and I wish, that kind of thinking about the being armed thing, now that there are NEDA walks, now that there are ways to to raise awareness, it still surprises me all the time that people see eating disorders as a private issue. And I look at how many amazing people I've met at the walks who are in recovery, who are supporting people in recovery, who have been on this journey, and the sense of community and support that comes out of it is so powerful. And then I encounter people where, they're like, well, okay, how many people is it really? And then when you start talking about it, in my experience, most people will tell you they know someone.
I know.
So then every once in a while when somebody's like, really, it's that prevalent? And I'm like, yeah. So why like, why hasn't it gotten to the level everywhere where we just, it's part of what you talk about, you know, it's part of education, and really having it be there. So that's just,
That
yeah.
really ties to your point where we just don't have that education for parents, right? Just a pie chart. If here's an eating disorder isn't, oh, I feel fat today, and then all of a sudden I have an eating disorder, right? That's what so many people think, it's a choice, that someone just chooses this and they can get over it when they want. It's, you know, the myths are endless, but just to have a pie chart of, oh, you can be triggered into this. It can start very young. You know, there's all these components to it. And these are the behaviors that, you know, it's not their fault. It's not your fault. Just those messages would be so helpful. But there's shame, right?
Yeah.
There's some stigma and shame around it that prevents it. That's why I'm doing this, because I'll tell anybody anything what happened in our family, because I don't want them to feel like I did in a silo alone out there, somehow shamed and wrong and bad because this was going on, and then super alone when she died, right?
Yeah. No, and I'm so appreciative that you're doing this, because I mean, these, not that podcasts or even a word, you know, 15 years ago, but like, to be able to search and have something like this pop up, I hope it leads to more conversations
Yeah,
and the ability for people to find the resources
yeah,
that they need, or just to be able to talk about it,
right,
and get to a place where, you know, they're able to get support from their loved ones,
right.
even if their journey is going to be a long journey. And I think just also for people to understand that it's like, it's the brain too, and how that plays into it, and
Yeah,
like, to break down the shame, I think, is so key. And things like this, like your website, like our conversation, the NIDA resources, other support resources, like all of this serves, and many hours of, you know, I'm sure of therapy and the, you know, different treatment programs, but all of this serves to break it down.
yeah,
And it only has power if we continue to give it power.
right, right. Absolutely. There's just, people shouldn't feel alone. They just shouldn't
Mm-mm.
feel alone in this. And even if, you know, there's someone that I lobby with a lot, and everything went right for them. And within a year, her daughter found recovery. And then we talk about my story, right? And we compare the two, and she had that support. She had the treatment. She had, you know, it all went right, and how different the experiences can be. And I learned a ton from her. People who are in recovery and families that really connect, and they have things to share, and we just don't have that bridge to have
Mm-hmm.
everyone hear that message, right? There's so many stories, there's so many experiences, things we don't talk about at all still. There's so much shame around, you know, co-occurring issues, and the stuff that, I don't want to talk about that yet. We don't even really talk about bulimia as much as, and certainly not binge eating disorder as much as we do anorexia. So just
Mm-hmm.
getting the language and the stories out there, and connecting, and being able to connect everybody together, so people have equal resources, and can say, oh, thank God, you know, she understands exactly what I went through, or he knows, oh my gosh. And there's so much to do.
And I love that the two of you connect, and that it's the, you know, that her story, you know, was such a different path. And I remember, you know, the first time I went to the conference, like, I was really worried it was going to be hard and emotional and sad, and that I was going to be this, like, pariah, for lack of a better word, because, like, my
The
sister,
deaf
not
people.
as right, it's not a success story.
Right.
And I was so surprised
Yeah.
that, like, the first thing I felt was hope.
Yeah.
People were so kind,
Yes.
in sharing their own stories, and just being generally wonderful, that, you know, when I came back 4 years later and brought my mom, who hadn't not the vocal person sharing my sister's story, is 100% supportive of me sharing our team for the Nita Walk and speaking at with youth programs, and supports me 100%. But she herself, that's not what she does. And she came and I think had a lot of the same fears and was like, oh my God, I'm going to be like the dead girl's mom. And she had some of the most amazing conversations. And I remember her getting to talk to you and go out to dinner. And my mom just, like, I had never seen her like that. And
Yeah.
I kept thinking, like, wow, like if these resources had existed, if it was specific to eating disorders, because I know, like, at some point they had tried support groups, but like it was never about the same stuff that my sister was going through. And to see her be in a room of people who got it, who she didn't have to explain it to. And this was 11 years after my sister died, so 17 years after this whole thing started. And I think it was really the first time where she had that feeling of like, oh, some people get me and get this.
Yeah.
And like, I know everybody who has to go through that. I want ultimately no one to go through this. Until that time, if you have to go through this, everyone should get that kind of validation.
Absolutely. And I watched your mom. When you first introduced me to her, she was sort of like in this self-protective, you could tell. I was there. I remember that. I first walking into Nita, I was like, I don't know about this. I'm out of here. I was really, it was very difficult. I was very nervous to be shunned and to be that death, like, oh, look, here comes death. It's a horrible feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And you're scared, and I don't know. And then by the end, when we were going to dinner, your mom's like, hi, Kim. And she was just like more animated and lighter, just lighter, because I think she realized, oh my gosh, this wasn't my fault. I'm not alone in this. There are other people that totally get it, and I'm not being shunned. I'm not this failure. I'm sure parents feel like they're going to get judged, right? That they failed their child, and they get the opposite. Parents just adore them. And for me, the same. I sat in my first session and cried. I don't even know the topic. It didn't matter what the topic was. I was like, my people, everyone understood. Yep. Every single person in that room knew the struggle and the pain, and they didn't even over dramatize it. Oh God, your sister went through this in the 80s and 90s. Ooh, that was a bad time. And I went,
right.
Oh my gosh, this is great. And it was so, it was really, and then when I met you, it was so emotional. I was so like, 25 years after my sister, the start of her eating disorder. It was a blessing. It really was. It was so wonderful.
I agree.
So we are not, even now, right? We're still dealing with it. Eating disorder is not in our lives the same way, but it's still something prevalent within our families and in our world and our thinking, and this connection is still important. So
I agree.
Yeah. So I guess the message, what would you like to leave the message for people, for siblings, for parents, anybody watching who's kind of curious maybe? What do these two weird girls have to say? Two women have to say? What would you like to leave them with?
I would like to leave with a message of hope, and that, I hope that for people listening, or watching, they came to this looking for something, and I hope you found it. I hope you're not alone, whether you're a sibling or a parent. I hope you find some people to share with. And I honestly hope that in, a year's time, in a few years' time, that the sibling network, whatever that is strong, because we're all out there. We've all walked it, whether for a long time, a short time, however it ends up. And all siblings should get that kind of support and access. And, I hope you found what you were looking for here. And for parents, I hope this is helpful to hear a sibling perspective, but also ask your own kids and talk with them. And I know it's not easy, and I know this is so hard. And the fact that you found this and that you're watching and you're listening is great. And I want to thank Kim, because I want to thank the universe for bringing us together, because that was an amazing moment. And I'm just so glad we had that first conversation, and that our friendship has continued now, and that to be part of this, because I feel really hopeful being part of it, which is why I feel that what I want to leave with is to pass on that hope and that feeling that things will be good.
Yep. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This has been good. It's been really fun to hear, because we haven't talked in this format before, so it's been really fun to hear your thoughts on different things and your wisdom over the years, for sure. So thank you so much.
This has been great. Really, really fun, and I appreciate your questions as well. This got me thinking. So thank you.
I know.